Hi, welcome to another episode of
Hard Take
or
Big
Big
Take.
Take.
I'm Weiren,
I'm Nicholas.
and we are an education lifestyle podcast where each week we discuss a topic, and at the end we decide whether or not the topic is interesting, which is,
Hard Take,
or frustrating, which is.
Big Take. Okay.
Right. So for today's topic, we're going to talk about something which is quite highly debated over the past few weeks since the National Day rally. We're going to be talking about the revamping of the GEP program, right? So, understand that the GEP program, 40 years of the GEP program is going to be revamped, okay? And it's going to cater to a wider range of students. I believe it's going to be conducted in a much more different light from how we see today, right? So let's take a look at how the GEP program is like now, and how the students are selected at this point.
Okay. So the GEP program, all right. So these are just details that I actually obtained from MOE website. Currently, students are selected for GEP through a two-stage exercise in primary 3. All right, and those that are selected to join, they will be invited to join from P4 in their GEP schools. They are continuing their education in one of these 9 primary schools that offer this program. Will you remind me what are the 9 primary schools?
Well, I believe, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly which ones they are, but I do believe Rosyth is one of them, St. Hilda's, which happens to be my alma mater. There is Henry Park, Raffles Girls Primary, Anglo-Chinese Primary. I can't remember the rest.
Okay, so let me come in to rescue. Okay, so we do have Cat High as well.
Yes.
Okay, as well as Taonan School. Alright, these are the known 9 GEP schools. Okay, so how does the screening currently actually takes place? Stage 1, alright, they will be screened on 2 of these papers. Why not you take a step? What do you think are these 2 subjects that they will be screening based on?
Okay, the students will usually stream for English and mathematics in stage 1, and after they pass, they will go on to stage 2, whereby they will take another paper testing on English, math, and just general ability.
Okay, I'm just curious, Weiren. Over here, like we know that P3 they start to have science itself, but why don't screen on science?
I don't know. I suppose all of it is lumped under general ability, right? So I think at the much lower levels, instead of testing them more for their content knowledge, because these are gifted students that we're talking about. Okay, naturally by right lah. By right, naturally they should have an advanced level of logic and logical thinking. I believe there is no necessary need to test for science at that point, but more of math lah.
Okay, mathematics. So will you think that math is sort of like a proxy to their logical ability to process numbers?
Oh yes, most definitely. And I think there are certain parts of math also which eat a little bit into science. For example, like in PSLE, and I remember there was one year where the parents were furious when the PSLE actually asked this question in a math paper. They asked what is the weight of 8 $1 coins. Then they asked the students to make an estimation. Yeah. So and this is part of the PSLE math curriculum. And of course in upper levels, in higher levels, in secondary, in JC, they also test on your ability to estimate.
Okay.
Right. So math does indeed serve as a proxy to logical thinking lah, and your intuition. Right.
But PM Wong did state that there will be a new GEP selection test. And I think this was one of the more closer to everyone's heart kind of topic. I mean, education and Singapore are quite synonymous with each other. So quoting on him in his National Day rally speech, right, that Singapore will discontinue the current form of GP as how we have mentioned, the stage 1, stage 2 selection, and instead will be replaced with this new approach to stretch students with higher abilities across all of the primary schools. So in this new regime itself, which I believe will be rolling out in phases, students themselves will be picked, all right, those that have higher abilities, all right, they will be stretched their abilities in schools, and there will not be the need for them to stream into these GP schools. They will remain in their own schools. And PM Wong himself did make it very well advertised, or should I say more well known to everyone, that he came from a neighborhood school. And was it Tanjong Katong? I think Tanjong Katong Technical. That was his.
That was the secondary school. I can't really remember what primary school he was from.
You were from Tanjong Katong Secondary
Yes,
School,
I
right?
was also from Tanjong Katong.
Was Tanjong Katong Technical leading up to Tanjong Katong Secondary School?
Tanjong Katong Secondary was like the successor of Tanjong Katong Technical, yeah.
Okay. So with this, okay, so let's just take a step back. Emotions-wise, 40 years of this GB program, and now PM Wong in his first ever National Day rally, he just came out and he just trying to reinvent the wheel itself. And what do you think about that? Like, do you think this shift is more inclusive, or I don't know, what do you think?
I think before we can get to saying whether or not this is a good or bad shift, maybe let's take a look at the old system and let's examine what was good and bad about it. Okay. So I think the idea here is from the old system was really to capture all those students that were really, really bright, and then they weren't being challenged by the existing school material. Okay, and basically put them in a place where they can where you can engage their intellectual ability a little bit better, and possibly help them feel a little bit less bored in class. So it's to engage these gifted students who are a little bit more inquisitive lah. Okay, so
do you have any examples? I know we've been teaching. Have you have GP students whose parents sort of like tell you like what are the kind of things that they are doing rather than the mainstream students?
I am not 100% sure on the GP curriculum per se, but I do believe I wasn't from GP. I don't believe you were from GP.
I wasn't from GP.
Yeah, I don't believe you were from GP as well. So I do believe that they do encounter like more broad based sort of topics based on what some parents have recounted. They will maybe teach them some basic programming, write a mystery story. I don't know, maybe I have heard of some GP math curriculum or math lessons basically teaching students how to count in base 6 instead of base 10.
Okay.
So these are all very, very broad things that we never ever touch about in the regular primary school system. But I mean, reading the recounts of those people on Reddit, a lot of the GP students or ex-GP students seem to recall having very, very good memories of the time, like really thinking that the curriculum is very, very fun.
I think the essence here, if to roll back a couple of minutes before you mentioned here, is to engage kids that have, I wouldn't say it's just an accelerated way of processing data, of learning, but also to engage them at their levels. So just to give an analogy over here, I mean, right now we're adults, but let's say I would say, hey, you know what, let's go for a course whereby we have to come back and learn primary school sciences and primary school math. I think the engagement will not be that much more interesting as compared to if, let's say, the course I'm going to ask you to learn today is on how to teach someone primary school math and primary school science, because content-wise, we are familiar with it. Right? So I'm using this analogy really to just see that for these GP to B students, perhaps the mainstream education are boring them. And because the way that process info, they are usually being quoted as being 2 to 3 steps ahead of teachers, and they already at the very infantile stage of the introduction of a topic, they start to ask very provocative questions. And why not this and why not that? So there has been people that I know from GP programs, they were once being labeled as rebel. All right, because the teacher would say you have to go 1 + 1 equals to 2. Yes, they do get 2 at the end, but their thoughts, logic, and all, it just doesn't gel well with what is the pedagogy of how it has to be taught. itself from there. So once the GP program they were being streamed into, they felt very much in place with other similar peers itself from there. So there was this particular quote unquote from LinkedIn, one of the contacts itself. They said that quote unquote, the good little girls steer clear of me, right? Because I didn't want to collect stickers or play 0 point on the playground. Right, so I prefer to take things apart, dig for treasures in the school grounds, reading obscure books, and speaking in a way that other kids deem pretentious. All right, we'll talk about that later. And but that's just really how this particular person actually taught itself. But once they go into the GP schools itself, they felt comfortable. They're in their element itself from there. So, I always have this more theatrical kind of representation. I'm sure everyone watched Young Sheldon. So I think Young Sheldon is like a epitome of like a very extremely gifted
case,
person. Yeah, but I think because just more for theatrics, for mainstream television, I think they try to portray the awkwardness of a nerd itself from there. But I think there was some certain. Do you watch Young Sheldon?
A little bit.
Okay, at the start he was like in mainstream Texas primary school and all.
Yeah,
but after that he went to the university and all.
yes.
He felt a little bit more, suitable.
More comfortable, yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. So I mean that's the good about the GP. We help people to expedite their potential, put them in place. But I'm sure there are also some naysayers about the GP program. Would you like take me through on that?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, of course, of course. I think the one thing that we cannot deny is, generally when these people are set aside. I mean, we're talking about the top 1% of the cohort, and from the most elite schools as well. So when these people are sifted and put aside into these special GP classes, I think it's inevitable that the mainstream students will tend to shun them. I think it's a common experience. But I think at the same time, also based off like anecdotal experience, the GP students, some of them also will tend to develop this superiority complex, like, hey, I'm better than all the mainstream students as well. So I think there is this aspect, this social aspect, which is, I think we've seen this lah. As educators, we've seen this, and it's not necessarily a good thing. The elitist labeling, all right, from the mainstream to the GP students and the GP students back down to the mainstream. Yeah. So I believe the Minister of Education also mentioned about hot housing, where we really try to push the students to learn far beyond what they should know or what is age appropriate. I think that is something that whether or not it's good and bad, I believe most experts say that hot housing is mostly to the detriment of the student itself. Okay,
But
yeah.
again, I would like to just chime in to ask, if a child is gifted, right? At what juncture do we see, hey, I think this child is gifted, is suited for a GP program? Or can a child as like malleable, like a metal sheet, be hammered through numerous enrichment sessions beyond their mainstream education, and they are hammered into a GEP suitable kind of a student?
I think there's always a mix of both, right? Some students just have naturally more ability and naturally more intuition. And I think from a GP context, if let's say the student does not have this intuition in the first place, then perhaps the rigors of the GP is not the place where they are supposed to be. Yeah. So I think over the past few years, we've seen cases of like tuition centers preparing kids for the GP program, the GP placement test, which I personally feel is a little bit ridiculous because, it's first of all, it's to measure your natural ability. I've always felt that the GP program should be an indicator, the placement test should be an indicator of your natural ability. And if let's say you train for it, even if you make it, and then you enter the GP program, are you able to handle the rigor of the program
So,
itself.
so I would say
Yeah.
those GP prep programs are artificially inflating a child's ability, right?
Yes.
It's like you can't. I mean, we cannot see your GP as like your NAFA 2.4 kilometer. Where you train for it. It's just your ability that's given,
Yes.
and we don't want it to be artificial from there. All right, and
Yeah.
also just want to address on the point on the elitist labeling itself. Okay, I mean, this is, I think, a topic for another day, but just like in any kind of society, there will always be labels that's being given. And if we're to do filtering programs like this, by having students with higher ability, we are giving them a more preferred course whereby they are given the correct kind of stimulating environment to grow. But the elitism kind of a label from there, how do you think, would there be any chance for us to still provide for these kids the kind of engaging environment without also, in a way, promoting the elitist kind of labeling?
I think I feel that elitism, this sense of them and us, usually stems from putting people into separate groups and having them spend more time apart from each other. So I think the one way to address this is really to have these GP students spend more time with the mainstream students, like really have them sit through more classes together, play games together. So I think this is one way in which we can prevent this elitist labeling from happening now.
So if you
Yeah.
see of this PM Wong new move over here, which is not to get the GP kids to enter GP schools, but rather they have, in this new system over here, this illustrate is a school-based program, or what we call as the after-school modules. The students who is part of a school-based program for science, all right, will make sense of phenomena and investigate possible solutions through collaborative inquiry.
Yeah.
But this is done within the school for
Within
this
the school.
new
So,
school.
so as far as I know, the new GP program will consist of two different segments, which
Okay.
is the in school and out of school.
Okay.
Right. So, of course, you mentioned just now you asked how we can prevent this elitist labeling. So one way in which we can prevent this elitist labeling is to just include more people. So I believe the new cohort will be, I think, 10%.
Oh, okay. That's much more.
10%, yeah, which is about 15 students per school, on average 15 students per school. And now, if I recall correctly, this new GP program has been extended to 180 schools.
Okay.
So
rather than the 9 GP
rather
schools.
than the 9 GP
Okay,
schools.
that's like a 20 times
Yeah.
increment. Okay.
So now each school will have, as mentioned, both the school-based program and the after-school-based program. So within the school-based program, the report did mention there was an article on CNA which highlighted the difference between a school-based program and after school. But personally, I don't see any clear difference in terms of the learning objective. It's not obvious to me. It says that a student who is part of a school-based program will make sense of the phenomena and investigate possible solutions through collaborative inquiry.
So many
Yeah.
many big and vague words
yeah.
over here lah.
Well,
Just
the after school program will learn more about science and technology behind the food on their plate. So I'm not 100% clear about what the difference in the pedagogy is. Yeah.
I'm just concerned over here, like the inclusive nature. I mean, 9 schools to 180 schools, definitely, like I said, that's like a 20 times increment.
Yeah.
So instead of the top 1% of the cohort, we are just extending now to 10% of each school, which is roughly 15 times 180. We're looking at big numbers over here,
Yeah,
much
yeah.
bigger than the current intake and all. But the execution itself, I think we don't really have any actual data, like what's the frequency of them staying back? Are we going to engage any external vendors
Yes.
itself? And are there any plans to disperse the GP tutors or GP teachers that are currently in the 9 schools into all of the 180 schools?
Yeah.
And I think the issue here is the execution is one thing, but it will take a long time for Singaporean parents itself to sense the policy change in the GP program. Now, what do you think to the street will the parents be feeling about this shift? Will they feel like now, hey, my kid has a higher chance of going to the GP, I will go for more GP prep classes? Or will they finally understand the essence that GP, again, is more of like an innate thing? You can't make it happen, all right? But rather, it has to be with you. It's more of like a nature rather than a nurture situation from there.
Wow, this one, I think, knowing Singaporeans and the way they are, I imagine, because there is no indication on how they will select the GEP, the students that are eligible for this new GEP program. But assuming that there is a standardized test,
Okay.
I will assume that naturally there will be like centers, enrichment centers that will be offering GP prep programs as well.
Okay.
The selection test prep programs, I think is inevitable.
So I'm going to quote Education Minister Chan Chun Sing. Right, he mentioned that kids manifest their abilities at different points in their life. I think we can attest to that, definitely. Right, I mean, we have provided tuition for kids who are otherwise academically weak, but with the correct kind of attitude towards studies in P4, and they started to blossom in P5. The maturity caught up with them.
Yeah.
And I think that we can both also agree that girls generally mature faster. Mentally.
A little bit earlier.
Earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the boys a little bit more playful, they will eventually catch up in P5 and P6. So in this new GB system over here, all right, they are allowing students themselves to attend this kind of after-school events, or we'll call it a school-based program, at a later time when their abilities manifest. So in the old system, P3, they screen, P4, they screen. But what if someone in P5, right, quote unquote over here, if let's say someone were to be extremely potent in the language of English, all right, but P3, P4, they are not so decent, but in P5 suddenly, their command, the mastery of the language is good. At this particular time now, they will also be selected for school-based high ability program and after-school modules. So this is actually a very interesting thing.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Because this allowed us to have, instead of a first chance at primary 3, second chance in P4, there's now a third chance in P5. And I believe in P6, if your abilities does also manifest, I think there's a fourth chance for you to go for this school-based learning and all. Now, do you then think that this is more of like a street cred? You sort of like pin it on your body and say like, hey, I went for after school kind of program, I was selected. Do you think this will be add on to the DSA system?
Wow, I'm not 100% sure.
Okay.
I think at this point in time, the GP system doesn't, or rather the DSA system doesn't really take into account the GP, whether or not a student has gone through GP. But I do believe, like in the case of appeals, like it might be an additional thing for the school committee to take note of.
Okay.
Right.
The secondary school committee.
The secondary school committee to take note of.
But ultimately, this particular move, I felt, all right, was more to address the social aspect and also the elitist labeling kind of a feature over here. Because for this social aspect thing, at the end of the day, what if I'm a good kid? I have friends in P3 in the old system. I went for a GP program. I don't even know what's happening, but my mom said, take it, let's take it. And it turns out that I'm gifted. And then my mom said, hey, you know what? You have to uproot and move. Yeah. So in this new kind of system, you get to stay in school with your friends. All right. And the school-based programs are going to be after school for some of it, and it will not disrupt your mainstream. Like, can you imagine from 1:30 to 2 p.m., I'm going to be out of my general mainstream class because I got this special high ability program to go to. It will remove all this kind of distancing, this social distancing. Yeah, especially if, let's say, kids only should do this at the end of the school.
But apart from that, there's also been a more general shift from the ministry for more like inclusivity and generally less being less hard up about the actual numbers. Being less hard up about the actual numbers. So I think there is also this aspect of let's cater to more people as well. I mean, at the same time, we have to talk about, I mean, as much as we think that this is a good thing, we also have to talk about the potential shortcomings of this new model as well.
Okay.
I don't know, Nicholas, what do you think could be some shortfalls or shortcomings that could emerge from this new system?
So going back really to the start of this entire podcast, I mentioned there are GP kids who are generally quite bored in mainstream schools, all right? Pre-filter, they are bored because they're not being engaged at the level that they should be engaged at, right? So now we spread it out to 180 schools. And I believe that the ministry should want to step in to talk about the rigor of the filter, to talk about the rigor of the selection process, which will once again then feel that GEP will now become mainstream again, which means that the content itself is not going to be very much tailor-made. So I believe in the current GP, there's IRS, individual research programs, all right? There's also individual studies programs, and also that cater more to the kids' personal interest, right? So let's say you're interested at a young age, you're interested in gynecology, obstetrics, all right? So things like female health as well as pregnancy, they can just do a segue and just segue out and go and research on all that. But now that if it's in 180 schools itself, I think the ministry will eventually has a certain guideline on how these newer programs are being catered to. Which brings me back to the whole idea here is that will now the truly gifted kid will still be bought in this new system itself.
My main concern as well is because now the GP is, or the new GP is spread out over so many different schools and so many different programs. How do you maintain a quality? Right? Will somebody say like, maybe school X's GP program is better than school Y's GP program?
Okay.
So is that also another factor that will play into the balloting process?
Okay.
And make things a little bit more. Will it change the dynamics of the whole P1 balloting
So
process
apart
as well?
from having a brand name, you are now also looking
Yeah,
at
the
the
GP, the
program
potential
that's being
GP,
offered. Okay. So
Yeah.
this is more on the more for students who are going to go to P1 and the parents are going
Yeah,
to shift for all that.
And
So
you know how this has a trickle down effect to
Yes.
like housing
Yes.
and zoning and things like that.
Okay,
So
so-
yeah.
So this is okay, but I'm just really afraid that if coming back to the whole idea of the students not being engaged, and will there be a rapid ramp up of teachers who are in mainstream schools selected back to MOE? They train them in a very hasty way so that they can be deployed quickly back to the 180 schools to do the GP.
Yeah, so
programs.
according to the education minister, he did say that over the past few years they've been spending resources and
Okay.
they've been acquiring resources. He did say that they have sufficient resources to allocate, but I don't know how exactly true this is going to be on the actual ground itself.
I mean,
Right.
we still have to admit that giftedness itself, I am pending more towards the side on it being a nature kind
Yeah.
of thing. I mean, there has been child prodigy, they are born, they are having like, pitch perfect, and they are able to play the piano, just from sight reading, they can just hear once and they can just play it. All this can't be trained. I mean, yes, it can be trained, but you are still not going to be much more proficient than like a natural at that. So with this particular new shift at all, are we trying to say that we are now rewarding hardworking and consistent students as well to recognize that, hey, you know what, you might not be naturally talented, but it is through your sheer grit that you are applying for your studies and education that we are going to reward you in the same category as this naturally gifted student.
I think this is going to be very hard to say lah. This one we really have to see how they implement it over the next few years.
Because-
I think it's time for us to decide whether or not this particular revamping of the GP system is tuck take or big take, right? So, Nicholas, what do you think?
I genuinely feel that this whole revamping of GP system is more towards the side of tactic for me personally. All right. I mean, there are some ground issues that I feel that will not be any form of an elegant solution. But general is that I feel that this whole inclusivity into the 180 schools will very much try to erode away the elitism tag. And I think there will be more social cohesiveness. I don't want and the kids to uproot and shift to new schools where bonds have already been forged much earlier on. But just a slight worry, as I've mentioned the last one, is that I'm just worried that are we trying to force it? Because I mean, this is not a question that we can definitely make a decision, an executive decision on. Is that can we just scrape this thoroughly? Everyone just go through mainstream school, you know. But we have to accept that everyone is different, and that we want to challenge a kid at a suitable level, and also to try to avoid artificial hot housing. I don't want to teach the kid too much just to fit a certain mold whereby they are not of that caliber itself.
Yeah.
What about you? What do you think?
I don't know. I personally feel that at this point in time, I personally feel that this is a big take to me because there are really too many unknowns at this point in time to decide whether or not this revamping of the GAP system is going to be beneficial for the students, or if it's going to devolve into some sort of situation where the tuition centers eventually become prep schools for all these screening processes, you know. So yeah, I at this point in time, I don't want to say if this is a good or bad thing. So because there are so many other peripheral issues that we have to think about, for me, this is something which is big tech.
All right. Yeah. We would like to know what you think about this particular GP revamping. And I mean, if you're a parent that has kids that's currently in the primary school system, 2025, 2026 is just going to be, I believe, 1 or 2 more years from now. Then we can start to see the rollout. And hopefully there's some noticeable data that we can see on all this efficacy of this program and all. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.